Well, Vern, I'm going to get started because people will be still coming in and they don't
Sure.
want to hear me. They want
Yeah,
to hear you.
right.
So I'm going to do a couple of the technicalities. So welcome to our December 11th meeting of the British Empire Study Group. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I hope to see you back again next year. Um, for all the old timers, you've heard this before, so you're just going to tone out. This is a webinar. So while you could see us, we can't see you, but we could talk to you. You could talk among yourselves. So tonight's speaker, I'm going to turn it over to Vern, but tonight's speaker is Vern Morris. So those of you who are into classic stamp collection, United States stamp collecting, know Vern from all of his exhibits. He's like a very prolific exhibitor. He's won many awards. I think the latest one that we put up was, well, it isn't the latest, but one of the ones I like is the 2006 Champion of Champions for his exhibit on the fighting of the feds in Philadelphia, locals and carrier mail, an independent mail. Anyway, that I think that was a fabulous exhibit, but he's had many other fabulous exhibits. So Vern is, he started collecting in the 50s, and he obviously grew up and did much bigger and better things. And he is, let's see, I think he really focused on the 18th century America, don't you, Vern?
Yeah, that's how it's evolved.
Yeah, but that brings in the British Empire because, America was under British control. So, Vern does a lot of things. He's a regional president for Florida for the United States Classic Society. A lot of history foundations also. I think the Florida History Foundation, is it?
Postal History Foundation.
Postal History Foundation. And you're a member of the Royal Society of London and you've done exhibits there. I think you're just fantastic, which is one of the reasons I'm excited to have you tonight. So I'm going to shut up and let you go on with your presentation.
Okay, well, thanks, Joan, for the introduction and the opportunity to give this presentation. There will be next year a monograph published on this postal crisis of 1775. So what we're going to do is all climb into our time machine and get back 250 years and try to put ourselves in the position that the Patriots were in um, during very chaotic times. So we have about 75 slides. We should do it in about 45 minutes. And I'm a Philadelphia guy, so this is really comes to when I was young and I'd get out in Independence Hall and I would just think about all these incredible people that formed the best government, I think, in the world's ever seen. So this is currently the coming up to the 250th anniversary, as we all know. So let's step back and just take a quick look at 1772. And this cover, does anybody notice what's really grabs you about this cover? We're going to look at it a little later in more detail. But it's from Sam Adams to Eldridge Jury. Uh, at the beginning of the Committees of Correspondence, and it went from Boston to Marblehead, and it's a way 1.8 letter. So that stands for um, one pennyweight, 8 grains of silver. That is the British Parliamentary Post. So we have Sam Adams and Elmer Drury communicating and depending upon the British Post. So we'll come back to this. Just give that some thought. In 1775, we start seeing a different currency, and this is January 6th, 1775. This is a letter from New Haven to Weatherfield for 8 pence, a different system. This is the one that I understand is the most common use throughout the British Empire. And and had been used early in the colonial era from 1711 in the United States or in America to 1754, and then we'll see why things changed. But here is a change, and something's already happening. So this is postal history, and even though it's pre-stamps, we still are focused on rates, routes, and postal markings. So let's just step way back for a moment when the um, active queen established a formal post outside of England in all the dominions of the British Empire. And these were the rates. And instead of memorizing all these, you can just focus on a common one, which is 60 to 100 miles, was 8 pence, which is a British coin. So, and then this is the first example in North America of a postal rate under Queen Anne. This is New York ship 10 pence. The rate is 9 pence from New York to Philadelphia, and one for the ship captain, making it 10 pence. Earliest known Queen Anne rated cover in British North American colonies. So we have to really understand currency to see what happened in 1775. And I'm sure all of you understand where the word pound came from, and the symbol from the Roman libre, and denari was D for pence, denari from the Roman silver coin. And what was happening in the world, silver was a big problem because between 1400 and 1600 and 1700, Europe was purchasing things. They were obsessed with China's porcelain and silk. And all of Europe, especially the royalty, wanted porcelain and silk. China demanded hard species coin. They weren't going to take paper money. And over 200 years, a lot, if not most, of Europe's silver wound up over in China. So um, Europe came to the Western Hemisphere looking for gold and silver. England found very little in North America. Spain found plenty in Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia. So Spain wound up with a lot of silver, and Britain and British colonies had very little silver. This sums it up here. Severe. So, and the silver that Great Britain had, they wanted to keep in England. They didn't really want it over in the colonies. So the 13 colonies had a severe shortage of hard species coins, shillings, and pence. So what happened over the next 43 years, the colonies had to either print their own paper money or print copper pennies, pence. Every colony went their own way, and depending on the financial health of the colony, the inflation of the currency varied at different rates. And by 1754, trying to send letters from one colony to another was really difficult because of every colony had different inflation rates. In New England, the group of New England, five or six colonies hung together, but all the others were independent. And by 1752, there were 8 exchange values. So if you want to send a letter from Massachusetts to Philadelphia, it's a whole different set of currency. So it was a real problem. And Ben Franklin is the one who really wanted to radically change the system in 1754 and switch to a account system that was based on pure silver and troy ounces of weight. So, and I don't believe this happened anywhere else in the British Empire. My understanding is it's pretty unique to the North American colonies. So, um, you couldn't take pure silver and make a coin. It was too soft. It had to be alloyed with bronze to make it stronger. And depending on how much percentage was silver and other factors, it was very difficult. So the simple answer for Ben Franklin, it was rather brilliant, is that they would just have an account. You send a letter from here or there, and every quarter you would settle up your account who owed which money. And you may get some letters and receive other letters, and they'd offset. And somehow he had a way of moving along, and it solved a lot of the headaches. So 1765, um, King George, for the American colonies, came up with a formal rate system in pure silver accounts, the Ben Franklin system. So, as far as I understand, the Parliament didn't apply this anywhere else in the British Empire. It was only for the North American colonies. And the same 60 to 100 miles was 2 pennyweights. And 4 pennyweights equals a shilling coin. So the King George III also divided the North American um, colonies into a northern district, as shown here, from Portland to Suffolk, and also a southern district that went from uh, Edinburgh to uh, Savannah. So for this study, there were so few letters that went on strictly began and ended in the Southern District. It doesn't really help us to study what happened. The important things were really in this Northern District. And there was a cross post that went from New York up to Quebec. So at the same time, the British had a big debt from the French and Indian War, and they needed to get money either by taxation or apply a stamp act. And most people, non-philatelists, think that the Stamp Act used adhesive stamps. It's not. It was really an embossment or a hand stamp, and applied to printed documents, newspapers, and people that were really in the upper echelon. It didn't affect the day-to-day people too much, lawyers, journals, merchants. So they were affected the most, and they're very vocal. They have an audience, and they screamed. And that act was passed in March of '65. It was effective on November 1st, and within 6 months it was repealed. Too inflammatory. Here's an example of the actual pamphlet. Apply certain stamp duties. I am also a collector of broadsides and newspapers and pamphlets, and there's only 11 of these that were printed outside of England, and this is the only one that was actually printed in New York. The others were largely Philadelphia. And here's an example. You can see the embossments on this document right here. Very hard to see. This is a blow up. There's an embossment and a hand stamp that is sideways. So in response to all this going on in 64 to 65, the Patriots were really upset. And they had committees, and especially in Massachusetts, several of the towns in the Boston area formed committees, and they would correspond with each other. And it was all quiet. It was hidden from the loyalists the best they could. And but everything seemed to resolve when the Stamp Act was removed. And they also had a Currency Act in '64 where the colonies were not allowed to print paper money any longer, and they weren't allowed to reuse the existing paper money. So a couple of years later, Ben Franklin is an example of a cover to Ben Franklin in London. This is entirely domestic in England to Ben Franklin in London. At the same time, the Boston Massacre occurred March 5th of 1770. Three patriots were killed immediately, really inflamed everything. 1772. So a couple years later, um, these committees of correspondence reformed. They were there for a year or two in mid 60s. Then when quieted down, they didn't have to really meet. But this was incentive to reforming. And so a few other things started happening at 1772. Um, the Crown um, decided they were no longer going to, in Massachusetts, have the juries and the courts paid by local um, loyalists, but instead controlled by London. And then next year, Virginia was sympathetic for all that was going on in Boston. They were the first full colony as one entity that developed a committee of correspondence. Then 1774, New York did the same things with the Sons of Liberty. So we're coming back to this letter here. Let's look at this more closely. So this is 1772. As I mentioned, Sam Adams to Elbridge Jury. This is the first cover in private hands. It's in my collection. That was a reactivation of the committees of correspondence. They officially reassembled in November 1772. This is a month later, and you can see they're using the British Post. So it was obvious to them pretty real soon that they wanted to keep this secret, and that's not the way to do it. So what actually is a letter to Elbridge Jury, and then he sent a response back. That's his signature is this large E. Sam Adams to Elbridge Jury with response. Elbridge Jury was famous for the present day gerrymandering. And so you can see the postal rate there, and pennyweights and grains of silver, which is the Ben Franklin system. And on the inside, there's the Marblehead return to Sam Adams. And this is the contents. Here's the Marblehead, and nothing exciting, but so 1773, the committees of correspondence are more active. And here's an example from a letter with the contents from September 1773. And um, they're talking about in case of war. You can see it right here. In case of war, they're already, their mindset is already that this may be a possible outcome. 2 months later, Boston Tea Party. The king was not happy about this. So, in the beginning of 1774, Ben Franklin is the Deputy Postmaster General for the Northern District of British American colonies. He's in London, and he gets hauled down to the Whitehall Palace Privy Council, and he was chewed out. He stood there and listened. He didn't argue. He knew he couldn't, but like a gentleman, he just took it in the air. 3 days later, he was fired, but he stayed on in London for another year. So then they had the Boston Port Act, mid 1774, where England shut down the Boston port. And the place that got most mail thereafter was Marblehead. This is an example of that. February 7th, 1774. So here's a very interesting letter later in 1774. It's September 1st. and it's from Alexandria to Philadelphia and George Washington. It was sent on September 1st. It probably got to Philadelphia 4 days later. And interesting that September 5th of 1774 is when the First Continental Congress met by the post. This is by the British post. 3 pennyweights, 8 grains, silver. That was the rate from Alexandria to Philadelphia. So at the same time in 1774, it was obvious that the Patriots needed something. They didn't know what. They just knew that the committees had to be secret and send things by courier free or military courier. So William Goddard stepped up and in early 74. He proposed his own private post, and was willing to charge 20% less than the standard rates that the British had. And in the spring, he toured 20 some towns in New England. They were all on board. And then in July of 74, that Boston Port Act came, closed down Boston. So everybody in New England got guarded and they didn't do anything. But let me go back here. Goddard did then go to Philadelphia in September when the First Continental Congress met, and he presented his proposal of a private post, or he would do it for the Patriots with a 20% reduction. And this is out of the Journal of the Continental Congress that was printed maybe a year later, which I have, and talked about how he addressed the Congress, and they were all interested. They didn't pass it, but they were interested. So now we're getting to the real substance. So what happened in 1775? So to understand this, I did a study of all 1775 data covers I could find in archives and in private hands. And I found a total of 109. And I restricted the inclusion criteria was they had to be from the Northern Division of North America, not transatlantic, archival and non-archival, and I was stepping aside from Free Franks and anything transatlantic, unless it also connected with a internal domestic separately rated route. And for date, I used the postmark instead of the internal manuscript date line because the letter may be dated September 1st, but not actually mailed from the post office till September 5th. And I'm looking especially for the Ben Franklin system of a pure silver account. And also those that are paid by coin immediately, not placed on a future account. They're the two study groups. 109 covers. So I found that the ongoing system of Ben Franklin with the silver account, there was only 49. More than half were paid on delivery in British coins, the system that goes back to 1711 to 1754. So there's a significant database for both. And this new system, which was the very old system, was larger. So I then wanted to take a look at the baseline, the 2 years before 1775, to see if that was an ongoing trend or was ramping up. And I found none in 1773 and only one in 1774. Then I looked also at 1776 and found none. So this is very peculiar to only 1775. Now, is that just a coincidence or is a cause and effect? So let's go back here and take a look closer at these 1775 covers. This is the first one that is in British coin, 8 pence. One pennyweight, 8 grains is the same thing as this is really a double rate. And here's another one in the Ben Franklin 1754 system of 2 pennyweights. Um, I think it's underneath the picture here, but that's payment to a future account. So this is really the loyalist or the royal system. This is 4 weeks prior to Lexington and Concord. Then in April, we find another one of these 6 pence in British coin, the old system, which is now being rejuvenated per post. 6 pence due on pickup, no future account. And here's a very interesting one. This is April 13th, just a week before Lexington and Concord, and this gives both types of rates, shilling to pennyweight 16 grains or 8 pence. So it's almost like the postmaster of origin put both down so that when it was received in Marblehead, the recipient or that postmaster could take his choice. There's only two examples like that, and they were both during April. April 19th, 1775, the whole world changes in North America. This is 10 days later, a letter, very interesting letter that from Roxbury Camp to Cambridge and the Committee of Safety, which is like the War Department. And it announces up here in the upper right, um, Minutemen have arrived and they're ready to go. There's no raid on this. This was handled by a private military courier. On May 10th of 1775 is the first day of the Second Continental Congress. And Ben Franklin, unbelievably, arrived in Philadelphia 5 days before this. And the Continental Congress already printed paper currency on the day of the Second Continental Congress opening. And you can see it right here, United Colonies. June 1st of 75, this is only a month later, and it's a committee of correspondence from this town of Abington. And on the cover, you can see there's no rate. It went by military courier. They weren't going to take a chance with going through the British mail system. There's the date lines. June 1st, 1775. Committees of correspondence. So May 20th of 1775 is an interesting letter. This is from Williamsburg to Philadelphia for 2 shillings. And here we have June 17th, Princeton to Philadelphia. And the rate is N, meaning shilling /8. Or no shillings, 8 pence due. Princeton, June 17th. This also happens to be the the first postmark from the future state of New Jersey. And there's 3 or 4 of these known. This is the earliest one of the first hand, New Jersey's first postal hand stamp. So we'll step aside a second. We're going chronologically, June 20th. So we have a free frank by John Hancock. So the Congress hasn't yet really formed their own congressional post or law allowing this, but he sends it on public service. So, in the previous 7 years in the royal postal system, things were sent on His Majesty's service, and they were using on public service for the Patriots. This is the earliest congressional free franc known. So this is a big day, July 26th. The Second Continental Congress formally authorizes a post office to start in October, and Ben Franklin instead of Goddard wanted this as Postmaster General. And they also agreed for a 20% reduction effective October. August 4th, this is the earliest known congressional hand stamp, to my knowledge, down here, Hampton. Um, so it's 8 days after the Continental Congress established the post office, and we're in a transitory phase. And the news got down to Virginia several days before this, and it's 8 pence. There's an 8 there. 8 pence due in cash up the Rappahannock River. Here is September 7th, a letter from Philadelphia to Lancaster, N6, meaning no shillings, 6 pence. Hand stamped in Philadelphia. So here we are, December 6th, we're at the end of 1775, and a letter from New York to Philadelphia, N6, for no shillings, 6 pence. 6 pence was the rate between Philadelphia and New York. So what about this Goddard proposed 20% reduction that the Congress had thought would be useful and help to undercut the British system and steer the public to using the congressional post? So um, from my research, of those 109 covers, only 8 show a rate reduction. And this is the earliest one, May 4th. And it's hard to say it. There's an SH here, 6 pence. And the normal rate would have been 6 plus 2, 8, the captain's, and it was reduced from 8 to 6 pence, 20%. It's a 25% reduction. This is one of my favorite covers. And so it's from Philadelphia to Williamsburg, July 4th of 1775. And you can see the PHLA down here, July 4th, to Virginia, received by and hand stamped in Williamsburg. And this really tells it all. 0 and 10. 0 shillings, 10 pence. The standard rate between these two was either 1 shilling or 4 pennyweights, which is 12 pence. And this was reduced from 12 pence to 10 pence. I have this, and I can't find it. For the last 2 years, it's in my safe or stamp room somewhere, and I can't find it. Very frustrating. So here's a good example of this rate reduction. So Chestertown is a small town in the northern Chesapeake, but on the east side, across from Annapolis in Baltimore. And I actually drove down to Chestertown from Philadelphia. It's a beautiful ride, rolling hills. So this is very early, beginning of January. This is the from Chestertown to Philadelphia, and this is the this is actually Tim O'Connor's cover. This is a unique hand stamp, and this is the standard Ben Franklin rate of two pennyweights, 16 grains. That is the standard rate for the 100 to 200 miles. So just keep that in mind a second. We're going to come back to this. So then later, and this is the British, the parliamentary post system. So then we're going to go to September, okay, and we see the same rate, but now in pence. 0 shillings, 8 pence. It's the same rate, Chester town to Philadelphia. It's equivalent. It's just different by payment systems. The last was the Royal system, and this was the Patriot system. No reduction. Now take a look at this one. N6, the same thing. Chestertown to Philadelphia in the middle of the year, June 20th, N6, reduced 20%. So I submit that of those 109 covers, eight have significant reductions. They're not exactly 20% because if you take 20% of 6 pence, you get something crazy like 1.2, and there is no currency. So I think they would round things up or down. So here's a chart that summarizes everything. And if we look at the far left, this is the pure silver account system that existed to Ben Franklin time from 1754 to 1775. This is when and it's in red because these are all loyalists. And the strange thing is, it starts up again at the end of the year. And I finally concluded this was when Ben Franklin took over, and he was going to be officially active in October. But all of a sudden, the same system starts showing up on a future Patriot account. There was a void here of about 2.5 months where there are none. The other system in the British pence and coin system, payable and delivery, except for that, there's one example early we saw in the beginning, and then all of them occur from Lexington and Concord to almost the end of the year. The 20% reduction component of this is a much narrower group, and five of these eight occur right here in the center. And you can see there's no overlap in this system. The purple, are the two covers that were marked by the sending postmaster in both systems. It never happened before April or after. So, just very interesting. And I don't think it was coincidental. So we're going to look at free francs. So as of July 26th, and today's post office considers their beginning on July 26, 1775. So the Congress was in effect, and they passed many laws as to who could send things free through the congressional mail. So we got a couple examples here. This one is on the service of the United Colonies by John Hancock, November 27th, on the service of the United Colonies. Then in December, there are two examples. This one is on continental service on behalf of George Washington by his aide-de-camp, Horatio Gates. That's December 3rd, 75. Then the last cover of 1775 is very fascinating. It goes from Albany for three pennyweights, 8 grains of silver, to Montreal. And at that time, Montreal was occupied by the Patriots. Very few people know that. And the Americans ran the post office in Montreal. This is the only cover that went to, in United States history, that went to an American post office in Canada. So a lot of big things happened in 1776. Declaration of Independence. And here's a 1777 cover on the service of the United States from Baltimore to Philadelphia. It's the only one I'm aware of. April 6th. Valley Forge, Treaty of Paris, signed by Sam Adams, Ben Franklin. All this wasn't wrapped up until 1784. And our fathers hung around for a long time, but all good things come to an end. And when I have free time in Philadelphia, a lot of times I just go and I hang out at Independence Hall. Any
Wow.
questions?
Well, we have a couple. So I'm going to leave your slideshow up because one of them, I'm going to jump to a question about the dual rates. Richard Colborg asked that, and I'm going to bring him over because let me bring him over right now. He was wondering about the 1775 covers, and he'll be here in a second. So, um, so maybe what we'll do, Richard, do you want to unmute and ask your question if you would?
Yeah, thanks. Vern, on some of the 1770, I think there's 1775 covers. There's about three of them in a row that seem to have the standard shilling pence notations. In fact, if you could go back to, there's a Chestertown and a couple before it. Yeah, there's one there. Wish you could blow that up bigger. I can hardly see it. That looks like 1 shilling 4 pence. And in the standard, the system that I'm used to seeing, and I just wonder, I heard this presentation before, and I can really still come away wondering about the N, and I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of speculation, and that it's not an N, it's a cross mark or something. Um, but sometimes they sure look like N's. But
Yeah,
it's
I agree with you. For instance, on this one from Chestertown, does that 1 and 4? Does the rate? I mean, does it work out to a believable rate?
okay. So that's the receipt on that's what they would collect. So the postmaster in Chestertown wrote the 2.16, and then when it arrived in Philadelphia, there was inflation of about 1.67. So they would charge local currency, um, and they would elevate it up. So that's I think if you multiply 2.16 by 1 2/3, you're going to get 1 shilling 4 pence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how all these covers. There's the rate. That's why I said in the beginning, I'm going to go by the rate the Postmaster Senate doesn't have any inflation factors in, but where they destination post office, they had to use their currency for the accounts, and they had to factor in the inflation.
Hmm.
Hmm. Vern,
Okay, thanks.
yeah, what drew your attention to this difference? If you could repeat that.
Well, I'm not the only one. With a lot of this, Ed Siskin, Tim O'Connor, currently, and others, they've just noticed that during that year, there were the two systems that were used during the previous 70 years. And one system with the pence was used from 1711 to 1754, and then it switched to this Ben Franklin system with the um, penny weights and grains of silver. Um, and it stayed that way. So when Ben Franklin came back in October of 75, he eventually reestablished his system with silver on account. Like I showed in that graph, the lower bottom half of that graph was blue. So it was Ben Franklin's system. Let me see if I can get to that chart again. Yeah, here we go. So this is the theoretical silver that was put on an account. And in the early part of 1775, these are all royal posts. And these are all Ben Franklin's system that was reestablishing. So it's crazy. There's two different systems. And this is the one that's in coin. And so what happened is, I think the Patriots, they wanted to keep it simple. They weren't going to establish their accounts right away. Who knows anybody would ever get paid? You send a letter from Patrick Henry to Ben Franklin, Philadelphia. They wanted to get paid. The post rider wanted to get paid right away. So it was in coin and due right away. And uh, so and it was British coins, so it wouldn't be that conspicuous to the loyalists and the British military because it was still using British currency. So it was kind of hidden, but they didn't have any accounts. You paid what you got, and Ben Franklin came back in. They always liked that system, and they didn't need to do the 20% discount because once by the end of December. Actually, the British stopped after Lexington and Concord. They virtually stopped using land mail. Um, in my monograph, it cites gives all kinds of examples, and they didn't want their letters intercepted, so they just did it by ship. And eventually, the British on Christmas they gave up all their post offices and had just a warship in New York Harbor. And that would accept letters and take them to Transatlantic or down in Savannah or St. Augustine or somewhere else. So it's this is Ben Franklin's system. Ben Franklin when he was, working for the British, and Ben Franklin when he was working for the Patriots.
Hmm. Well, that brings up a question that Michael Clark had. Who were the mail carriers? Were they
Yes.
loyalists or colonists?
Well, it's very interesting. Their sentiment slowly was changing in the early 70s. And I give a lot of examples in my monograph. Um, and, a lot of times they would deliver mail to a post office and, they went to the local town store and people would know when the mailman was coming, they'd show up and they'd get their mail. And there were a lot of events happening. Then they would have political debates right there on the spot. And uh, a lot of the riders would pick up letters on their way. They would pick up a letter, say if one was going from Boston to Philadelphia, in New York City, people may just give them a letter and say, take it down to Philly, and here's your 6 pence or something. And the riders would keep the money. So they were becoming independent contractors. Some of them. And it was a wild and crazy time. Guys, if some of the riders had two containers in their portmanteaus, and one for the loyalists and one for the patriots, and they would deliver them to the place of delivery. I'm talking about just for a couple months. That may very well have happened.
Richard Rizzo asks, prior to 1775, if someone lived in New York and sent a letter to British Canada, let's say Quebec, did Canada accept Ben Franklin's rights?
They were part of the British colonial system.
Oh, so they were
Yeah,
forced to.
yeah, they were part of the system. They were part of that Northern Division.
So he really dictated even up there what went on to
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, really interesting. Um, let's see. And the last question, one of your early slides, you showed the conversion from sterling to grains. Can you see that slide again? Because that was glad we left your slideshow up there.
Yeah. So pure silver in a shilling contained 4 pennyweights of silver. And a grain was a piece of silver the size of a grain of wheat. That's how they determined how much silver was in a grain. And that goes back to Roman days, I think.
Mhm.
So, this is pure silver. Of course, they didn't use any pure silver. It was really more of an intellectual idea for an account system just to get away from all the inflation problems.
And one more question, and then we'll get to you, Richard. How Jim Hoffman asks, how did the transition from the British to Patriot Postal control about 1775 affect the rates for sending newspapers?
I don't think it affected them that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think the papers largely went free from one post office to another. I think for a long time, the post system wanted to get the information spread, and they would just do it to the next post office, and that was free.
Interesting. Okay, Richard, you have your hand up. Yeah, I'll have to ask you to unmute.
Yes, unmute you.
Yeah, and by the way, if you want to come over, I finished bringing everyone over. If I missed you, please raise your hand and I will promptly bring you over.
Thank you for a most interesting presentation, Vern. Your covers are superb. My question is as follows. Have you seen any cover in all your examinations that was docketed as just the numeral 12, perhaps meaning pence, but rather than 1 shilling being docketed as 12 pence?
Um, I 12 pence would have been the rate from Philadelphia to Boston and Philadelphia to Williamsburg. And I have I think I showed one that was 2 shillings. Um, but you're asking in pence instead of shilling
Right.
in pence. Um, I'm pretty sure there are some. I can't think offhand right away.
So it is possible that instead of writing 1 shilling, the postmaster may have just put down 12, meaning 12 pence.
I believe that's very possible.
Okay, thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Anthony, I'm going to ask you to unmute there.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, you're
Okay,
you're fine.
I go by Bert. Okay,
Bert,
my
I'm sorry.
question is that all of your examples were right on the coast. Were there couriers that went into some of the interior towns like Lancaster in Pennsylvania or some of the suburb or west of Massachusetts or west to New York State?
Well, yes, there was the one in Albany, and some of those went to Montreal, and I showed one example. I have two that went from Philadelphia to Lancaster. That was a cross post, and actually the Norfolk um, was a cross post um, from I think it was Williamsburg. Um, there's a little
So
tiny.
if somebody had a letter that was out on the frontier, they would bring it into some town, and that town would then pick up the mail when the courier came through.
Yes, and also there were newspaper subscription writers, especially uh, from Philadelphia North, where various newspapers in New York City or Boston, um, they would have writers. They would pay them by the year, and they would. I have examples in my monograph, and they would ride out to a day or two to different towns to deliver newspapers. And some of those writers uh, started picking up letters and the money to deliver them, and they weren't competing with the post office because post office didn't go there. And there were some newspaper writers that were on postal routes, and for a year or two there, in direct competition with the post. So there's a lot of crazy things going on, and that's why the British were skeptical of even using their land post during 1775.
Thank you very much.
Anthony, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question?
Might be able to answer something. First and foremost, fabulous talk. Some of the stuff there was mind blowing. That's all I have to say about that. Fantastic. Somebody asked about newspaper. In the British Isles, I don't know about America. Every paper that was put, every single sheet of paper that was printed had to have a stamp on the top of it, a government stamp. That covered postage in the British Isles. I don't know about America. But I know in the British Isles, every book and every there's an example from 1784 on a book. I don't know if you can see it. See that little red mark there?
Yeah.
Every newspaper and every book that was published had to have that, and it was a government stamp. And that also covered a newspaper's postage. And that continued right up until the late 1800s. That's my company, but
That's interesting. So, Vern, we were talking earlier about was this unique to the United States? Or did any of the British
So,
any other colonies might do
that's a
something
question
like
I
this?
have for the audience.
Yeah.
Outside of the United Colonies, did any other British postal system ever use the pure silver pennyweights and grains of silver for postal uses? I'm not aware of any, and the few people I've asked, they don't know what I'm talking about.
I think you stumped everybody. Anthony, an answer you don't know. Anthony knows everything. Les, go ahead.
Yeah, Vern, I just want to say you did a really good job. I enjoyed this, but I have another meeting to go to. So
Oh,
see you later.
well,
Okay,
thank you for joining
thanks
us.
for
Thank you.
attending. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe someone watching this show a little later will remark on it. David, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm really curious to know who were the most efficient writers during this period, when had the colonies. The reason I ask is that, of course, I did a research paper a long time ago about the Plymouth colony. And it doesn't have anything to do with stamps, but just the history was, of the rock was going on, etc. back then. Anything about your guess about what colony might have been more proficient writers?
Um, I haven't read anything about that. I would think it would be probably Massachusetts and maybe New York and Philadelphia at some point. They came along at different times. Of course, Massachusetts was jumped out of the starting blocks pretty quick. So
It would be my opinion also. I was going to say Massachusetts, partially because of the research that I did on Plymouth Colony. And, Harvard is one of the oldest institutions, that started its life, so to speak.
are you a member of the Manuscript Society?
No, I'm not. I
Might,
guess I need to join.
might want to. I'm on the board, and it's a good group.
Okay, I'll have to look all that up. If perhaps that could be provided
Yeah.
by email.
Yeah, we'll get that to you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Vern is quite the student of things, and I think the Manuscript Society and the philately go almost hand in hand, and there's a lot that we can learn from each of them. Okay. Is there anything else? I know this is, I know we have some other things going on. David, did I just put someone's hand down that I shouldn't have put down? Anyway, does anyone have anything else?
Yes,
Oh.
Jane. Joan,
Yes, Tony,
I
welcome.
I can't seem to turn a video on here.
Oh, I don't know what's up.
But anyway, that's look, this was fascinating. It suddenly put a piece of the postal history in with actual history. I mean, this is all, I haven't seen any of this before, and this is quite fascinating. I'm quite intrigued by it all. It's needless to say, I don't have any material like this, uh, but it is fascinating to see.
Well,
And
thank
thank
you.
you very much.
I think
Thanks, everybody.
few people have what you have, Vern. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. I guess we'll see no other. Oh, Paul, chime in.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Mark, YURKIW, in the chat pointed out that Ken Burns' documentary on the revolution is currently on PBS, and I agree with Mark. This really fills out a lot of the information that we got in the documentary.
That documentary is fabulous, by the way.
Absolutely.
I thought that was, it was a great way to bring, it really made it live for me. It filled in a lot of blanks. But Louis,
Hello,
Morel.
thank you for the presentation. During your talk, I was reminded of the fact that the Canadians issued a stamp in 2013 that featured Benjamin Franklin, but it wasn't about him. It was about honoring the 250 years of postal service going back to 1763. And if I'm not mistaken, that was the British North America Act, which took over from the French the parts of Canada. And Franklin is on that stamp, presumably because he was the Deputy Postmaster General responsible for that part of the British Empire.
Right. It makes sense.
And in the background of the stamp is an illustration of what Quebec City looked like at the time in the 1760s. So Franklin was around.
Yeah, that guy did get around. So, I always wonder because you see these names, and I'm wondering if the same person had, like a son had a name and them confused because, I've read some articles and it seemed like the guy went on like until he was 200 and something because some historian got the name wrong.
Right. Well, a lot of fathers want to name their kids after themselves.
Yeah. And I think, when I was doing research on something for some paper, it got confusing because, I had to, call up a lifeline. I was like, there's no way this guy could have been active here and active there,
Right.
as the author was contending in this article. But that's why you have to be careful with what you read, right? So, all right. Lauren, thank you again. This is wonderful.
Well, thank you, Joan, and thanks for everybody listening.
Yeah, and I hope to see, hopefully people come to the Boston dinner and get a little surprise.
Yeah, be nice.
And that will be great. And we wish you a very happy holiday season, happy New Year. And we'll be back in January.
Okay,
All
sounds
right.
good.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.